Great. So we'll make a start. It is 12 o'clock here in the UK. A huge welcome to you all over wherever you are. I know we've got people all over the world linked into this webinar. We've got people in Central and South America, lots of people in Asia, and lots of people in the UK. And other countries as well. So a huge welcome to you. Thank you for your time. And I hope this webinar will be useful to you. I'm going to speak for about half an hour just on some observations about middle leaders, from talking to middle leaders and observations in lots of different countries over the last 10 weeks. If you've got any questions, please ask on the chat function, or any comments. My name is Richard. I run this company. We do lots of middle leader training in lots of schools. Some of you who are online today will have been at the training, and some of you not. So that's a little bit about myself. We're going to start with this. This is something that I think is significant under normal times, but it's even more significant now in the current situation that we have. Quite often on leadership courses that I run, I ask people to think of their best boss they've ever had. And around, I've asked that question maybe hundreds, maybe even 1,000 times now. And in around 90 to 95% of the cases, the reason why people can think of their best boss is because of human skills, their ability to empathize, their ability to care, to look after their well-being, to listen to them, to appreciate them, to communicate, to have difficult conversations when necessary. It's rarely that someone says, that their best ever boss was a reason. The reason for them being the best boss was a technical reason. Sometimes it is, but only around 5% of the time. So this is even more the case now. Although we're using technology more to communicate, I'm stuck in a room. I'm not in my office in Birmingham today, in a very different situation. Although we're using technology more, the personal human skills are still very, very important. There is an expression that every wall has a door. And I think this is important at times like this, because at the moment there are lots of walls. There are lots of barriers to things we can't do. Most of us are stuck inside walls, but yet in terms of problems, there are solutions. There are different types of solutions. And again, this rings true with middle leaders that I've seen, that I've worked with. I've been head of 3 schools, and the hundreds or thousands that I train around the world every year. They tend to fit into 2 different characteristics, 2 different groups. One is the group of people who, when there's a problem, they love spreading the problem around. They communicate how bad the problem is, and they let others know that there's a problem, that there's something is sticking. Another group of middle leaders are the kinds of people that when there is a problem, they try to find a solution, and they put their energies into making things better for people. And again, obviously in this current situation, this will still exist. Hopefully you're in that latter category of the fact that you signed in for a webinar like this. Probably you are. The fact that you want to try to find a problem. There are new problems, there are new solutions, and we're going to look at those today over the next 25 minutes. But this is quite important. This concept has been around quite a lot in leadership, so we're going to have a look at this. I'm going to give you 4 words, and I'm going to ask you to respond in a poll as to which of the 4 words you think most matches your situation at the present time. And the 4 words are volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So in terms of your role, in terms of your situation, volatility obviously means lots of change up and down. Uncertainty, just don't know what's ahead in the future. Complexity, there's just so many different variables as part of the problem. And ambiguity, when you're not actually sure what the situation is as well. So you should have a screen that has just come up, which is your poll. Just check behind your screen if you've got it. People are voting already. So which of the four words would you think most matches your situation? Okay, 60% of people have voted. Are you fast? Okay, we'll leave it a few more seconds. Yeah, all four. Yeah, there are definite elements of all four, and I was tempted to make this a multiple choice question, but I'm going to stick with the one. Okay, and most of you have voted now. Around 3/4 of you have voted, and not surprisingly, the top one. So in order, the top one, 44% uncertainty. 31% of you have said complexity. 19% of you have said volatility, and 6% of you have said ambiguity. Of course, there's an overlap, and as someone has said in the chat, all four of them apply. But uncertainty is the biggest one, and that was live. 44% of you have said that. Yeah, I kind of predicted that in a way on this next slide. The fact that dealing with uncertainty is a big issue at the moment. People all over the place have got uncertainty in all sorts of ways, financial, and yourself, your own situation. You're going to be working from home, schools, depending on what age group you teach, depending on what subject, depending on your school's policy, on online learning and all these kind of issues. There are all sorts of things. So I've identified four. So as we go through these different questions, these four aspects, reflect on your own practice around that. The first one is trust, and trust is a huge leadership aspect and builds on anything. The more people trust you, the more agile they'll be in a situation like this. So for your teams that you're leading, if they trust you, your life will be easier. That's always the case. That's always, during normal times, that's the case. And it's even more the case now, in that the fact that if people trust you, they will be more agile. They're going to be more open to change. And just to expand on that just a little bit, there are two key factors within trust. One of them is time, and the other is behaviour. And in fact, some people might say, trust equals that times time multiplied by behaviour. If you do the right thing multiple times, people trust you. If it's a small thing you do right and you do it lots of times, that builds up. If you do a big thing right or wrong, that can have a positive or negative big impact on trust. It is worth thinking about now, if I ask the other people in your team, however big your team is, whether it's one other person or 19 other people or whatever, what would your trust score be with them? Because I can pretty much guarantee that the larger the score, the easier your life will be as a leader, because trust is such an important element. Can you build it now? Yeah, you can. So in these difficult times, you can build trust in lots of ways, and you can think about that. And this might be your biggest takeaway from today: is how do you do that? And there's lots of ways, of course. Following up on what you say you're going to do is a very, very big one. If you say you're going to get something out of people, then do it. If you say you're going to communicate, then do it. Do you have to be right all the time? No, but you have to have an integrity between what you're saying and what you're doing. The odd mistake is fine, as long as you are acting in integrity with what you say you're doing. If you say that you're acting with the student's best interests at heart, then you have to do that. So I think that's a really, really big one for everyone. If you can increase that, then your life will be easier. Purpose. This seems an obvious one in schools and education, but it's not, and we're going to look at it in a second. I do find it surprising sometimes when I ask people, what is the purpose of your department, your area, your subject? What are you trying to get better at? There's sometimes a little bit of a lack of clarity. And of course, at the moment, because of the way that people are working remotely, online and so on, the purpose might change a little bit. And we're going to look at that in 2 minutes. But that is important. Optimism is important. There's a difference between being optimistic and being positive. People who are positive see the best in every situation, whereas people who are optimistic think that the future can be better. And there's an important difference between the two. At the moment, optimism, there's an optimism in that you hope that you believe that what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is going to have an impact on people in terms of learning and in terms of well-being and looking after your team. And there's an optimism as well that at some point in the future, and no one knows when, that things are going to get better. Optimism often comes out in research as one of the key leadership attributes, which is often forgotten about when we talk about leadership, but is a really, really important one. People who are optimistic, have a vision for things to get better, in the short term and the long term, tend to be better leaders. And resilience as well. You need to have resilience at times like this. The resilience is the ability to bounce back from a situation. We're certainly in a situation globally at the moment. Can we bounce back? And in terms of middle leaders, that's very much about the culture of how you relate to people. One example, which is a significant example, is dealing with mistakes. Are people in your team comfortable to make mistakes? Because if they are, that's gonna give them confidence, and these things all feed in. So your ability to build a team where the ability to make mistakes is encouraged is down to you a little bit. We talked about purpose, and I've got these circles to show this. Education is bigger than schooling, and learning is bigger than education. I think, this is my personal opinion, but I think a lot of schools are missing a trick at the moment in the way that they are setting their online learning. The one branch of educational research which is the most consistent and has been for the last 20 or 30 years is the research concerning parental engagement. Parental engagement, the research has said consistently that when parents engage with learning, that their children benefit from that in all sorts of ways. Less so with the parents engaging with schooling. It's the parents engaging with learning that makes the difference. And some schools, I think, I say this is my personal opinion, I think some schools have lost an opportunity here to facilitate a parent engaging with learning. So, for example, a big thing that comes out in the research is how much do parents talk to their children. It makes a difference. We all know that from a very early age, not just in terms of vocabulary, not just in terms of vocabulary usage, but also in terms of attitude to learning, self-confidence, efficacy. All these kind of things are connected. And at the moment, it depends on what your subject, it depends on what your area, but it's made me a little bit sad that a lot of schools have over-focused on written work And especially with children, maybe kind of key stage 2, that age 7 to 11 age, where they still need a bit of parental input with their homework, or maybe the older ones as well. And to me, there's been a lot of written tasks, and actually there has been an opportunity missed, maybe not in your school, to facilitate tasks that can encourage children and parents to have oral learning activities and other things as well. It depends on your situation. It depends on your subject as to how much you can influence this. But some of you might have the ability to do this quite a lot in terms of setting your purpose, in terms of online learning, and in terms of communicating with your team. Are there wider things that you could really do positively that would help this parental engagement? Because although the research is very consistent and says that when parents do engage with learning, their children benefit, the research is less strong when in terms of schools that have done this successfully when it didn't exist in the first place. Schools have had patchy success in terms of getting the parents who don't engage to engage, and it's not the engaging with the schooling that matters so much, but more with the learning. Of course, this depends on your subject, and this was very different when people were still doing exam preparation and so on. But this is something to consider at this time. Generally, there are the two biggest problems with middle leaders are the following: vertical versus horizontal tensions. In terms of, there is a disconnect between what senior leaders are doing and saying and the needs of your own team. So, for example, not just in terms of it could be attitudes, and it could also be purpose as well. So sometimes you have different worlds. You have a world that the senior leadership team don't kind of link so much in with this horizontal world. So that can be a problem. And the other problem that middle leaders typically face is the tension between being a line manager and collegiality. We've got lots of international schools online. We've got lots of state schools, independent schools, all sorts of different types of schools online. And it depends, but in international schools, sometimes you're line managing your friends. If it's a small community, people go out together and so on. And how do you wear the different hats? And that can be an issue. I've just been asked the question, give an example of oral activities from the last screen. I think things like, you can set questions, debates, things that you can talk about your children with, take different points of view, school uniform, all sorts of issues that you can talk about, fake news. With your children, you can have really, really good debates about that, and schools can set guidelines and recommendations as to how you do this. But as a parent, and I'm speaking myself, I've got two children here who are with me all the time now. It's quite difficult to get into the mindset of the written communication and how school operates. But actually having time to speak more to your children is a good thing. So we're going to look at these two, going back to this slide, we're going back to these two problems. The first one, with senior leadership. So, you might or you might not have this problem in your school. There's an official reality which operates at senior leadership level. And then there's a ground reality, which operates at middle leader level, your team, however big your team is. If there's a disconnect between the two, then that can be problematic. So obviously communication. Now, in these times, hopefully your senior leaders have communicated with you what the expectation is in terms of you communicating with your team. Some schools have just said, well, we're going to carry on doing as it is. We're going to have meetings. We're going to use things like Zoom. We're going to use so that people can check in at the same time. It depends on the context. If you're living in your own country and are experiencing lockdown, that can be a different experience to if you are living in a different country. Even though in reality you're still in a room, you can feel more isolated if it's a country that you've recently moved to, or the measures for curfew are more severe. So, have you been given that expectation as to how often you should be communicating with people in your team? I was in a situation recently where I was in quarantine. Personally, I remember every single person who took the time and effort to communicate with me via telephone. I got lots of emails and that was great, but actually having hearing someone's voice on the end of a telephone, to me, was much more powerful. I can remember during that period, I would be able to list everyone who called me. People who sent an email, less so. So clarify with your senior leaders what are the expectations for communication at the moment, and how often should you be doing that? What are the means for that? And this is an important one. Again, the expectations for what you should be doing. This is always the case. If there's a big difference between the two worlds, this is where an issue can be. Probably the biggest question I get asked when I'm doing middle leadership training around the place, I was asked just on the last course I did just recently, was, what can you do as a middle leader if you have a senior leader who doesn't communicate with you, is not on the same page, displays very different leadership values? What can you do about that? And it depends. Sometimes you can't do a lot, but there's something you can always do. And Simon Sinek, who a lot of you will know, if you do a YouTube search for Simon Sinek Middle Leaders, there's a short little video on there that he talks about what you can do in this situation. And one of the things he recommends is that sometimes, you can't change the culture of a whole organization if you're a middle leader. But what you can do is influence the culture of your team, how your team works. And you can do that in a humane way. You can do that in a positive way. You can do that in a respectful way. And you can aim to be the team that everyone wants to work for. You can be the kind of the shining hub in a way. But that's frustrating. It is frustrating, and I'm not pretending it's not. And a lot of people contact me and say, there is this issue. Obviously, communication and try communication. Sometimes people have raised issues with senior leaders and they've been resolved within 5 minutes. Sometimes people overthink things in the head and don't actually communicate their problem to someone else. I know a great senior leader recently who made kind of a significant communication problem. He emailed a middle leader on Friday afternoon. In this country, Friday was the start of the weekend, and said, please can you come and see me on Monday morning regarding an issue that a parent has brought up. And he sent this email. The middle leader emailed back straight away, got no response until Monday morning. It ruined this person's weekend. They were, they were anxious. They were worried about what was going on. On Monday morning, the principal of the school spoke to the person, and actually he said, I wanted to pass on thanks for doing a great job in this particular situation. In the senior leader's head, he was thinking that this person is going to be really pleased to see him on Monday morning, but in reality, it was the opposite. This happens a lot. Communication isn't about sending a button on an email. It's about mutual understanding. So spend time on that. Line managing versus collegiality. This is an issue, and there's lots of different ways of doing that. But there needs to be a boundary. There needs to be, especially if you are in somewhere like an international school where you see people outside of the school context. But it's possible. I know lots of people. I've worked with lots of people who've done this very successfully, but they had very clear boundaries. They didn't talk about social issues at school. And vice versa. When they were socializing, they didn't talk about school issues. There was a clear boundary that, if you're socializing with someone, you're the friend, and when you are line managing them, when you're at work, you've got a different role. And this is important. It's also important, because if you are a caring leader, you need to have difficult conversations with people. It's not caring to let someone take a fall because you haven't intervened and given them some guidance because you felt uncomfortable. That's not good leadership, and that's not being a good friend either. So this can be an issue. I think one of the other things that is really perhaps people are struggling with at the moment, middle leaders especially, because middle leaders it's a hard job. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, often says that being a middle leader is the most difficult job, and in lots of ways I agree. When you're principal, it's a different. In some ways it's easier. There's more responsibility, but in some ways it's easier. However, at the moment, those of us who have been in education a long time, we're used to routines. We're used to things, and you might be struggling with new ways of working. I'm going to recommend this. I don't often recommend things, but this is something that by chance only came out, I think, earlier in the year, maybe the end of last year. This book by Nia Eyal, how to control attention, how to make indistractable. It's a great book, and especially how to deal with distractions, and your biggest distraction is yourself. And if you actually, I listen to a podcast, so if you're the kind of person who wants to listen to a podcast, it's about an hour long, so you can get a really good flavour for this book. So this is something that I am going to recommend because it's a freebie. So if you go onto your podcast store, whatever podcast you get your podcast from, if you look for a diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, episode 43, if you put all that lot in, you'll get a free podcast to listen to, where Nia Eyal kind of outlines the book. And if it's the kind of thing that you think might be useful for you, then that's something to consider. But if you are finding the transition difficult, if you feel like, why am I wasting so much time? Most of the planet has experienced this same system. There are 168 hours in a week, but at the moment, depending on your context, they might be going slower or faster than normal. And that's usual. People, everyone is saying very similar messages around the place, and it might be much more stressful than usual. Again, please have some sympathy for parents because there's a lot of parents who are struggling financially. There are, they've got the children at home. There's all sorts of issues. They're trying to keep the business afloat. They're trying to keep the finances afloat for rent, and it's difficult times. So that clarity and that understanding from middle leaders in terms of how you can influence your team, that's a plea from me. Technology, okay, we've got things like Zoom. I think they had last Monday 3.2 million new subscribers, and I think on average they usually get around 50,000 on a good day. And someone was telling me now that the value of Zoom is now 50% more than all the American airlines put together. And I know they've had some wobbles with security, so I think that's affected them. However, technology, it's here, but practice. I was part of a meeting the other day, which is the most shambolic meeting I have ever been to in my life. There was a lot of people, a lot of experienced people, most of which were heads or former heads. And to be honest, it was quite shambolic in terms of people, not being used to the technology, the way that the meeting was run. Okay, people are not used to this. So, if you are going to use technology, set protocols for meetings. You can do this. A lot of you will have protocols for how you run your department meetings anyway. And it's good to involve people in that. Don't necessarily impose them on people, but you can, that's good practice anyway. People have that. So you should have protocols for meetings, whether, are you going to use the chat function? Are you going to use hands up? Are you going to use, how many screens are going to be shared? This kind of thing. There have been some hilarious examples, and I think that there have been some learning ones as well. We talked about communication. Communication is everything in leadership, and think. You should have a list of people in your team. If it's more than one, have a list of people. I used to have a list of everyone who used to work, all the educators in my team. There were over 100, and I used to, it sounds crazy, but I used to tick off people when I spoke to them, so that I could ensure that by Friday I'd spoken to everyone. And within your team, however big it is, just make sure that you are communicating, that no one is slipping through the net, that you're following school procedures for whatever the best way of doing that is, whether it's through phone or Zoom or what else, whatever. A lot of people are keeping to department meetings. Many places are keeping their schedule going. The schedules are hard. I'm very aware now that this is the Thursday. Some schools should be on holiday. Some schools are on holiday. Some of you are listening and taking part now, and you might be on holiday. Lots of people aren't. Holidays are different all over the world. But holidays and term time, it depends on your situation. I know that there are lots of teachers who are working really hard, putting videos together. Clarity. There's so many bad examples of things that have been sent out because people have been gathering their thoughts in their heads, and just really double check on the clarity for that. Just to review those issues then. So hopefully, I've spoken for about half an hour. Hopefully, one or two of those points will have made sense to you, will be useful for you to think about in terms of how you're doing your communication, how you're doing your meetings, what is it you need to focus on as a middle leader now, and perhaps in the future as well, when things go back to more normality. But have a reflection on those things. If you want to send me a direct message DM via Twitter, that's my Twitter, and I can do that now. But we've also got the opportunity now, if we can use the chat function. If you have any questions, just whiz a question in there about anything to do with middle leaders, being a middle leader generally, or being a middle leader at this particular time. So just type away if you've got any questions. Someone has asked me about being a middle leader in terms of kind of running a music department. And it depends on the context of the school, but music departments can be quite tricky in terms of, sometimes there are staff with different hours, there are part-time staff, there are people who sometimes employed by the school, sometimes not. So, it's virtually impossible sometimes to get everyone in the same place at the same time. So that necessitates, creative communication. It also necessitates being respectful about people in terms of people's lives and taking into consideration, people are juggling a lot of things at the moment. All sorts of different things that are going on in people's lives. There's people dealing with sadness, there's people dealing with uncertainty, there's people dealing with financial worries. So to take consideration of that, you should always take consideration of that as a leader. But departments like music tend to be tricky, so it does involve. But again, make sure that if you do have a meeting and it's on a day that that someone doesn't work, what are you going to do about that? How can you ensure that person is informed of everything that's going on, so that they don't feel alienated? And even if you have someone who works for your school just a few hours a week, you still want them to be very proud of your school. You want them to be part of the team. You want to make sure that not just that they're following all the safeguarding and all the kind of legal requirements, but they're actually, role modeling that ethos of the school. So that's where the skill as a middle leader and the creativity comes in. Any other questions in terms of anything I've spoken about? We had the question about the oral activities. There's lots of things you can do there, and that's from age 4 to 18. You can do lots of different activities. Any other questions? I'm very aware that while I'm still on, and again, you can certainly send me a DM. Yeah, teachers. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Someone has asked about a lot of teachers are under much more pressure as preparation time has massively increased. You know, I know some kind of secondary, upper secondary teachers who are working harder than they've ever done before, because what they're doing is they're trying to make every lesson brilliant. They're doing a video, they're doing resources, they're doing all these things, you know, and it's really, really, it's difficult. And I think, you know, senior leadership need to be aware of that. They need to be aware that, you know, it's like anything. When you do something for the first time, it takes longer. First time you put your first PowerPoint together would have taken you longer than it does now. So that's you know, senior leadership need to be aware of that, and you know that can be done in just, you know, kind of an informative way, just to let you know that, you know, people are doing this. Some schools have scaled back. Last week we had a webinar, which you can get via the website, from David Ingram, who is in Shanghai, and they were in, I think, 9 or 10 of their lockdown, and they, you know, they scaled back on some of their things. They certainly scaled back on the video, because what they were finding was that the actual bandwidth of downloading massive videos, or uploading and downloading, was taking a toll. So, you know, teachers were spending a lot of time doing these fantastic videos, and then the students were not actually able to access them. So again, I would encourage people in their school to share good practice, for the experts who are good at doing the things, for them to do little sessions. I'm doing something tomorrow with a group of schools on you know, something that I know about. You know, share that practice. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time. You know, it's slow, isn't it, when you use technology for the first time, or you have a different system. You know, the schools that I think have been successful are the ones who have kept their practice as close as possible to what they were doing before. So lots of schools, you know, had online platforms, and they've continued to use them. If you didn't have any, then of course you maybe have got new ones, and there's a learning curve with that. And senior leadership teams need to know that, you know, under normal circumstances, you know, you schedule in some staff meeting time. You know, you don't introduce 20 changes at once, because they don't work. So there is a sympathy there, and that's you know, so that sharing and that communicating that message to senior leadership is really important. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and then there's lots of positive messages, and that's great to hear that there are positive messages coming from the chat saying that they've got a great senior leadership team. There are lots of good ones. I'm not saying in any way that, you know, that this disparity, it always is the case. You know, I'm working with some great schools at the moment where this isn't the case, but sometimes it can be frustrating. So that's for that. Yeah, there is, I know, and the issue of fairness is an important one, and you will find, just because of the nature of how schools are working, especially if you are an all through school. I know in some schools there's not unhappiness, but, you know, there are comments made that the teachers who are teaching maybe the older ones at the moment seem to be working harder. That's there. So our SF team is to voice over video themselves, but continues. Yeah, exactly. You know, when you're not confident with technology, one of the other things about parents is, and this came out last week, is that, you know, if you are in a city or a town where there's multiple, you know, schools like yourself, parents talk, and they'll often say, well, at such and such school they're doing this, at such school they're doing that. So it's important, you know, for senior leadership teams to talk with other schools in the area as well, to find out what people are doing, because parents don't always get the right perspective on this. You know, the parents obviously rightly want the best, especially if you're in a fee-paying school. But you know, sometimes they try it on a little bit in terms of what they're doing. You know, the issue of, you know, how comfortable you should be doing a new change. You know, you talk things through in a rational, professional way. You know, I had a teacher once who just said, "Oh, I just can't use a computer." And I said, well, you know, if you think computers will all have disappeared in a year's time, then don't bother learning it. But I think they're going to be here to stay, and you've got a professional responsibility to get up to speed, and we can put some support in for you. So there's always a balance of when there's new stuff is, how the degree of comfort in terms of voiceover and videos and all these kind of things. But it's like standing on a stage. The first time I stood on a stage, I was petrified. And absolutely petrified. I was working with some middle leaders in London a few weeks ago who actually had their kind of group of schools had hired a theatre in the West End, and they were scared. They were going on a West End stage in London, but it was a great experience. But I said to them, 20 years ago, I just wouldn't have been able to do that. And now it doesn't bother me the slightest, but it's just practice of putting yourself in this situation. So as a middle leader, you need to kind of absorb that and try to get that realistic. There is a lot of pressure on teachers. They're observing lessons for the day. Middle leaders are trying to monitoring things. I think what will happen is, it will evolve. There were lessons to learn from it. There's all sorts of different ideas going on about, the future, what's going to happen in the next few months. There's all sorts of different ideas. Some people talking about, for example, for the UK model, what if children go back to school in September and finish this school year and then start a new school year in January? Why not? The only reason we have a summer holiday in the UK doesn't apply anymore. So there's all sorts of interesting things going on. About parents. Parents observing lessons. Yeah. The other thing is, I found even with my own children that some of the tasks that my children have been asked to do, I would never set children those tasks in the classroom. They kind of, the tasks are a little bit more. It might not apply for your school. I know some schools are having some wonderful things going on. But it's a difficult one because you've got that tension, because if senior leadership teams do policies on what's going on, and then you've got Teams and Zoom, and people are watching what's going on. People are watching the lesson, and it's very hard. It's a very new. I honestly I prefer face-to-face training. Of course I do, because when I'm doing face-to-face training, I can control the room. I can see what's going on. I can respond to situations, and I can adapt just like you can in a classroom. Online is different, and it's not the same, and there's going to be a learning cycle, and some things might stick, some things will disappear. Again, can I just say, I appreciate how busy everyone is. I really hope there's one or two things there that are useful for you as a middle leader to take away. And take, if you've got one thing that's practical for you from or even two, then it's been a good use of 45 minutes. Thank you. We have literally got people online from virtually all the continents of the world. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that you have found this 45-minute session useful for you. Thank you for all your positive comments that are coming through as well. Really appreciate it. Please do stay healthy, and we'll get through this. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of you, face to face in the not too distant future. If you can DM me, you can any questions, you can email me, DM me, or any of those things. And I'll send a link to the slides if you want them. I'll put them on the website, and you'll get a automatic message from Zoom probably tomorrow, and that will have a link to the slides if you want to have a look at them as well. So thank you for your time again. I've enjoyed it, and good luck to everything good luck in the next few weeks and months, and I hope to see you again face to face sometime soon. Take care everyone. Bye bye.